Okay. I didn't say anything, don't know. Okay, so we talked about some of these questions Tuesday, but we didn't quite finish. So let's talk about what we need to do. So when you're buying a house, and I think Christian from last class, you're the only one that bought a house so far in Canada. So you're the expert for this. But what are the things we have to do when we buy a house? Do we just go out and say, I want that one and I buy it? Sorry? Yeah, if you have lots of money, you might do that, but for those of us, which is probably all of us that don't, so what are the steps we do when we want to buy a house? Okay, so look at what kind of house and location, but there's actually some steps before that, because I might want to live in Bridgewater. Yeah, so I might say, well, I want to live in this area, but if I can't afford it, there's no sense that I shouldn't look for things in that area. So first, what you should do is find out how much you can, we'll say it this way, how much you are eligible for. And you do this by going, and I talked a little bit about this. I'm not sure if all of you were here or not, but you can go from this bank to this bank to this bank, and that's slow. And it actually hurts your credit score. Because every time you go to a bank and they do a check on you, that gets sent to credit union, either transnational or Equifax, and your credit score actually drops a little bit when they do a credit check on you. What's better is to go to a mortgage broker because they have more knowledge of the banks, but they also have different lenders across Canada. So one thing I shared about the house I bought, the lender for us is not a bank. It's a company out of Vancouver, and the interest rate and the requirements were a bit easier to qualify than with the traditional bank. Because my wife and I don't work full-time. We're both part-time at different areas. So we're not a good, to the main banks, Canadian, TD, Royal Bank, credit unions, they don't like people like me because I don't have a full-time, long-term contract. Every semester, my contract gets renewed. So I have to go to different lenders. Anyway, go and find out how much you can get from a mortgage broker. What else should you do in that before you, I mean, you can look at houses, but what else should you do in the steps? Yeah, so then what you should do is find a real estate agent. Some people prefer an agent who speaks the same language as them, which makes sense because then you can ask and answer questions. But I have often, not a little bit, but I've often found some people who speak the same language as you have to find out with an agent, how long have they been an agent? Because I've seen ads where people say, hey, I just got my license, I'll help you buy a house. I'm not going to go to that person. I don't, well, well, yeah, you have to see how much experience they have. Just because they have their license, even if they have a license for 10 or 15 years, that doesn't mean they're a good real estate agent. Because you have to find out how long. You also have to find out how much, oh, sorry. Brad, can you open the door? Okay. Also find out from them, how much do they know not just about houses, but how much do they know about investing in houses? If there's somebody that's just buying and helping people buy and sell houses, that doesn't mean that that's a good purchase. They might just be after the commission and just try to sell you anything. And my friend has had several agents that he's worked with. He's newer to Canada. He came in 2016. But he's had two different agents just because they're, oh, he's a foreigner, he has some money. Okay, go look at this house, that house. And it wasted his time and the agent's time because it wasn't a good investment property. They were just trying to put him in a high priced house so they would have a larger commission, a larger commission. So mortgage broker, real estate agent, Then during that process, type of house, location, schools, those other things. Okay. And then before you buy a house, what do you need to know? What should you learn about the houses here in Winnipeg? Okay, so I'm going to say it slightly different, but in a bigger category. So costs of purchasing a house. Because when you buy a house and they say, oh, the house is 300,000, there's still additional purchases that you have as well. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So cost of purchasing the house, what else do you need to know about the house or houses?
How much it goes?
Like with the costs, you mean?
The lawyer.
Yeah, so I'll talk about that, but I'll include all of that here. So the cost or the price of the house and the cost. Yeah, so I'm going to say, so renovations. So it's kind of in a similar thing, but you should know some basics about a house. So typically what you want to know about is the things that are most expensive to repair are roofs, furnace. So sometimes people say to me, Mr. Trevor, I can get an inspector, I can get an expert to come in and look, and you should. But if you spend a few months and understand a little bit about different things to look at and to avoid, for example, if you're buying an older house, and by older, I mean 40 or 50 years, not 100 years, but even 40 or 50 years, it might have knob and tube. Most of you probably don't know what that is, but it's a system with the electrical. So, so there's wires that connect the lights, but they have little white things, and then it's going from white section to white section, white knob to white tube, etc. Anyway, it's a very expensive to replace, and now if you buy a house with this, the insurance company makes you change it. Okay, so that's, but roofs, furnace, if you want to do any renovations, foundation, those will be your biggest expenses if there's a problem with any of those things. Asbestos, yes. Okay, so knob and tube, and then asbestos, which is a type of material that causes cancer. If you're not close to it or breathing it, it's fine. So it could be in the floor or the walls, but if you're doing renovations and then you're opening it up, then it can cause problems. Solar, yeah, there's solar in different things. I'll talk about this in a different kind of section, but that is something you can look at. Are there ways to lower your heating costs or are there government grants or discounts from that? Okay, so I don't think you need to be an expert, but know a little bit about houses. I heard some people talking last class and in the past as well. Oh, I don't want to buy an old house. If the house is built in the 1950s or newer, so if it's 60 or 70 years old, it's still going to be a good house and solid. If it's 1950 and before, you have to be careful. My house right now was built in 1913. So I had to be careful, but it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I renovated a house in 2018 up by Polo Park. It was built in 1911 or 1909. So it doesn't mean you don't buy old houses. It's possible. You just have to be aware. Are there problems with it? And what do you look for if there's before you buy? But 1950s, 60s and more, usually there's no issues. So some people, like one person said, I'm not buying a house if it's older than 1980. That's fine, but it's okay if he bought one that's 72 or 78. There's not going to be a major problem with it. Okay, last question in this section. Who are the people involved with buying a house? So we already mentioned mortgage broker and real estate agent. Who else helps you with the house purchase? Okay, so the bank or lender. Okay, insurance company, yeah. Sorry? You'll be the owner. So, okay, But who else that we need to find people for? You guys talked about it briefly in earlier. So a house inspector, a home inspector. You don't always need an inspection, but it can be helpful with that. Do you want to just move the door? Because yeah, it has an alarm on it. I was thinking of someone else, but now I can't remember. So broker, agent, somebody who's really important. You need to have a lawyer look through all the paperwork and then process the house, register it with the city, purchase the property taxes, etc. Okay. Because of our time, I'm going to go through this at a later time. I want to talk about this question. Because people always say to me, should I buy a house? Is it better to buy? Is it better to rent, etc.? So let's just hear your opinion. Which is better, to rent or to buy a house? Maybe. Because it depends how long you're going to be in a place. If you're somewhere 3 years or less, as a general rule of thumb, but if you're somewhere 3 years or less, if you're going to buy, it doesn't make sense because of the costs of buying and the benefits of owning that house for only 3 years. If you're going to be somewhere 4, 5 or more, ideally 5 or more, then the costs balance out and start to be more beneficial for you. Okay. But it also then depends on other things, which I'm jumping through this, but depending on your rent right now, depending on the mortgage, what you're paying for, insurance, etc., it can depend on more things than that. But typically just think of 3 years. If you're somewhere, like if I'm in Transcona for 3 years and then I get a job at the University of Manitoba and I sell there and I move there, I should have just rented. So think about that. If you're married with children already, that's okay. Like that's one thing. But if you're going to be married and then have children in the future, in the next 3 to 5 years, then that's also factors or things to think about. However, in general, owning a house is good for a couple of reasons. Why is owning a house good? Why do people say you should have your own house? Why should we own a house? So what are the specific benefits of having your house? Okay. Okay, so paying for something you own rather than something someone else owns. Because when you rent, that money goes to that person. With a mortgage, that's benefiting you. Okay, any other reason of buying a house that's a benefit for you? Sorry, Vlad, can you open the door?
Every year, rent houses is cost more and more and more.
Okay, so rent increases, and then I'm also going to say house value increases. So let me just pause here, because again, I'm going to say maybe. Usually it does, but right now I would never buy in Toronto or Vancouver because we're going to have a market correction and the prices of those two cities are going to come down. In Winnipeg, the market is for the last 40, 50 years. It's been very slow, but steady and going up. Even in the slow years, it's gone up 1 or 2%. Faster in other years, 5, 6, 7%. So generally, if you're owning the house, it's going to increase in value. Anything else of why we want to buy a house? Yeah.
Your house for rent.
Yeah, okay. So that's what I've talked of often, and what I do in my own personal life is you can use some of it for income by renting bedrooms, or you can renovate and then add, or I'll just say increase the price. Okay, so you can, if I'm renting, I have no benefit, that money's gone. But if I own and I have a bedroom I rent out, or I renovate the kitchen or the basement or something, I can force the value of it a bit higher. Okay. So what most people look at, appreciation is the value of it going up. But also as you're paying the mortgage down, you're building in equity, they call it, the word. So the word we use is equity. Equity means the amount that the house is worth and the amount of debt or mortgage you have on it. So when I'm first buying a house, usually it's maybe I put 10% down, 20% down, and then I have 80% mortgage. But as I'm increasing over time, the value of the house goes up and these other things are going down. So sometimes people say to me, well, I just want to put money in the stock market. If I have $10,000, let's change it. If I have $30,000, let me play with some numbers here. Okay. If I put that in the stock market, can I borrow money from the bank to add to it? The answer is no. The banks won't allow you to borrow money to put in the stock market. Stocks of the companies, so they invest like for the New York Stock Exchange, the Toronto Stock Exchange. So with here, I'll just pull up the so yeah, like the TSX and so when you have stocks, you buy the stock of Royal Bank, TD, airline companies, and then it goes up and down. Okay.
If it was, your $30,000 each of paying a bank.
Yep.
After a month, you will take, come back to, 30,000, come back to 45,000.
It's possible, but then there's also a chance of it going up and down within that. For that. But here the point is with 30,000 in the stock market, you don't get any extra money. If I have 30,000 that I put into a property, into a house, I can borrow another 150,000 or more to buy the house. So now I have my money and I have the money, borrowed money for the investment. So in the stock market, let's say this goes up 5%. So if this goes up 5%, that means it goes up $1,500. If my math is right, you can double check. Okay. Sorry? I'm just making a number, whether it goes up or down, but let's just say it goes up in a year, 5%. If I buy a house that's worth 200,000 and it goes up 5%, okay, then that's going up to $10,000 because I'm leveraging what I have plus what I borrowed from the bank in order for it to increase. So it's a faster way to stock market. You can make money. I'm not saying don't, but this can be a faster way that you can be making money if the houses are increasing in price with that. Okay, and then you guys already talked about source of income, other people renting, etc. And then if you have some places you're renting, you can also decrease your taxes. So sometimes people say, well, if I put my money in the bank or in stock market, maybe I get 4%, 6% a year. In the house market, I'm only getting 3%. But if I add my mortgage pay down and I also add renovations or renting out, etc., I can get 10 to 15% in real estate in any year quite easily. Some people that I know are getting much more than that, 30, 40%, plus they own the property. So there's more that could be said, but this is kind of a crash course within that. But my suggestion is, well, there's two things. One is get to know people that are in these different roles. The more people you talk to, the more knowledge you have, the better choices you can make. Okay. The second thing is for some of you, you might be saying, it's hard for me to buy a house. What my encouragement for you to do is change your mind slightly. I want you to buy or think about that you're going to buy 4 houses in the next 10 years. Because if you're buying one and then you sell it and buy another one and you sell it and buy another one, you're still never going to get ahead because of costs, etc. But it's reasonable that over 10 years, any of you in this room can buy 4 houses and keep them. So you buy a house, maybe it takes 3 or 4 or 5 years, but once you have the house and you're paying it down or you're renting parts of it, it's not that hard for the banks to then lend you money for a second house. And then year 7 or 8, you buy a third house, and in year 10, you buy a fourth house. The reason for that is once you've done that over those 10 years, sell 3 of those houses. Now you have $300,000, $500,000, $600,000. You can use that now for an investment in commercial property or an apartment or stocks or anything else. And then as you're getting ready for your 50s, your 60s and retirement, you have that amount of money. Most Canadians never do that. They buy a house, they sell it, they buy another house, they sell. So when they're ready to retire, they might have 50, 100,000. But if they would have kept the house, rented it out, bought the second house, and then bought the third house and rented these, within 10 years, they would be able to be more financially free. So open your mind to think more like that. And then you have to ask, because when you're kids and when you're adults, usually you're saying, well, I can't afford it. You know, I don't have much money. I can't do it. Let's switch your thinking. And I've read lots of books to help me with this, but think about instead, how can I afford it? So your kids come, oh, let's do, oh, we don't have money, or we can't buy that. Ask your kids, how can we buy that? I don't have money for that right now, but what can we do to get the money? Can you bake cookies and make a bakery? Can you start a side business? Can you? The other day, I'll tell one story and then I'll quit, because otherwise I'll talk for another hour. I was at No Frills and they were selling canning lids. So when people can fruit or jar, like they make preserves, for whatever reason, they were trying to get rid of these lids. So a pack of them was 10 cents. At Walmart, they're $5. At Canadian Tire, they're $6. They had 40 packs, so I bought them all. So well, actually they had 80 packs because I spent $8. I gave some to my mom and my sister. The other ones I'm selling on Facebook for $4. So I've made, out of that $8 I invested, and I gave some money to my sister, or not money, some of those to my sister and mother, but I've already sold $110 worth of those. So from $8, I made $100. That's not, that's the exception. That's not every day, but you can find stuff on Facebook for $10, $15 and then sell it for 20 or 30, or you can do other things where you're looking, keep your mind open to look for things and then talk with me. We'll have a session as well. How do you start selling stuff online? How do you teach people online? You guys could be teaching Ukrainian or Spanish online within a week. I can show you the websites where you could be up and making money with that. You could make up little programs. There's all sorts of things, but you have to be thinking, how can I do that? Have a good night. Okay, see you guys.